Welcome. Welcome to this session. We are really excited to have you all with us. And because this is planned to be a just 1 hour event, and we are intending to keep it within the time frame, allow us to kindly start right now. So, thank you so much for joining us from different regions of the world. To this virtual launch of the report, Making Space for Women Leadership in Biodiversity Data and Evidence, a session co-hosted by the CBD Women's Caucus and the International Institute for Environment and Development. Before we begin, I just want to share a couple of housekeeping notes with all of us. There is interpretation to English, Spanish, and French. Hoping that this allows a better conversation amongst all of us. The session, as you can see, is being recorded because it's a public session that we are aiming to also share after with everyone that registered and might not be able to join us today. If you have any comment or questions along the session, kindly use the chat box, and the speakers and the team will be the best to address them as we go through the session. We will also be using Mentimeter twice. So kindly keep your phone or your browser ready so you can engage with these 2 moments, aiming to capture better your reflections and your interests in the discussion. So having said that, let me also share a bit about how we are envisioning the organization of the session. First, we will hear from a bit of findings from the report, more in detail about what the report is about. We will have then a mini panel, a 20 minutes panel with distinguished leaders, distinguished guests in the field of gender and biodiversity data who will share their perspectives on the report and how it connects to their ongoing work. And we will close by inviting you all to engage in the next steps of this initiative. My name is Amelia Reguin. I serve as the coordinator of the CBD Women's Caucus. And for those that are not yet familiar with us, the CBD Women's Caucus is the constituency for women and girls to participate in the Biodiversity Convention. We are a self-organized platform that enables women and girls to advocate for their rights and leadership within biodiversity-related decision-making processes. And it's our pleasure, as mentioned, to co-host this session with IIED. This session in particular, it's organized in the context of a collaboration between these 2 entities called Advancing Gender Justice in Biodiversity Data and Policy. Our aim within this collaboration is to support women's organizations to generate and use gender-responsive biodiversity data to influence biodiversity action. This initiative is organized around 3 interconnected components, those that you can see on the slide. First, the needs and capacities inventory. Second, a peer-to-peer learning process. And third, gender and biodiversity data handbook. The first phase, the needs and capacities inventory, was to build, its aims was to build a baseline understanding the needs, but also the capacities and opportunities within women's organizations to use, generate biodiversity data. So far, this first component included also different tasks within it. First, we launched a global survey back then in October last year during the intersessionals of the CBD, a survey that was available in English, Spanish, and French, aiming to gather responses from women's organizations, community-based organizations, about the type of data that they were using, they were generating, and as well as the challenges to do so. Based on the answers to those to that survey, it's we developed this report that we are launching today. In parallel to that report, we had a smaller policy brief that was presented a couple of weeks ago in the intersessionals of the CBD in Rome, as well through a press conference, and today through this official virtual launch of the report. It's important to mention that the findings of the survey that were crystallized in the report are going to inform the next components of these collaborations. But before actually thinking of any other further step, we want to take our time to better understand and collectively reflect on the findings of that report. And that's why I have the pleasure to invite my colleague, Ms. Shruti Ajit, a CBD Women's Project Officer, to walk us through the key findings of the report as the crystallization of the first phase of the needs and capacities inventory. Ms. Shruti, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Amelia. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from whichever part of the world you're joining from. On behalf of CBD Women's Caucus, I'm pleased to welcome you to the launch of this report. And let me begin directly. Biodiversity governance today is increasingly data-driven. So you have indicators which determine priorities, you have metrics which determine funding, and you have reporting frameworks which determine visibility. So in all of that, we know that data is power. So the question we must ask is, who holds that power? Who produces the data that shapes these biodiversity policies? And whose knowledge is systematically excluded or included? So our assessment today, which we did, that Amelia gave you a little bit of context about, challenges this persistent narrative that biodiversity governance suffers from the lack of gender data. The issue is not about absence, it's about structural marginalization. And this is where we are going to go into. If you see in the screen, you have these graphs that shows that women-led and community-based organizations are deeply engaged across biodiversity data value chain. So there are about 77% who are involved in data communication, 70% in use of data in everyday being. 61% of our respondents collect data. So they are engaged in data collection. And 56% of them also are engaged in data analysis of whatever the kind of data that they are collecting, and building evidence out of it. So these figures disrupt the assumption that women are passive beneficiaries of biodiversity policy, because they are producers of evidence, they are analysts of change, and they are documenting ecosystem degradation, conservation, resilience in real time. And yet their work rarely defines these national indicators or global indicators and inform formal reporting processes. And that is not a technical gap, it's a governance choice. So the assessment also reveals that biodiversity data generated by women-led organization is deeply, deeply community rooted. So if you see on the graph on top, it says that community members and women leaders play central role in data collection, data use, and data validation. About 57% in data collection, 43% in data use, and another 43% in data validation. This means that the evidence being generated reflects lived realities, and they also talk about food insecurities linked to biodiversity loss, water scarcity, care burdens, displacements, and erosion of cultural identity. This is not peripheral information. This is central to understanding biodiversity change. Yet, too often, this evidence is treated as supplementary, as context rather than core data. So we saw that qualitative and narrative-based methods dominate women-led biodiversity data practices. So it includes forms of methodologies like storytelling, interviews, testimonials, community documentation, and field-based observation. These approaches center lived experiences in indigenous knowledge systems. Too frequently, these methodologies are dismissed as lacking rigor. So we must be honest, the privileging of certain forms of data over others reflect historical power imbalances in knowledge systems. When 86% of the respondents of our assessment said, if you see in the one on your right, that 86% of them actually do collect gender and social inclusion data along with biodiversity and social, economic, legal, and traditional knowledge data, we see something powerful. This is that the integrated understanding of biodiversity governance. Women-led organizations are not separating ecology from economy or biodiversity from justice. They're producing holistic evidence because biodiversity loss is experienced holistically. So if we go to the next slide, please, Pame. So here we have to understand that these barriers are systemic. It's also clear about structural constraint, where 86% of respondents identified limited funding as their primary barrier. More than half lack access to digital tools and technology. Nearly half reported limited technical capacity, and 51% identify foundational gaps in data management and data literacy. So, but let us be clear, these are not capacity failures of grassroots organizations. These are failures of financing systems and institutional designs. Training without infrastructure does not build systems. Capacity building without direct funding does not create equity. Expecting community organizations to contribute to national reporting without resourcing them is extractive. So if biodiversity governance benefits from community generated evidence, it must invest in it. The real obstacle, perhaps the most political finding of this assessment, is that the primary barrier to policy impact is not the lack of evidence. It is the lack of recognition, access, and credibility. Community generated data is often viewed as informal, anecdotal, or insufficiently technical. But this perception reflects a narrow definition of expertise. Who decides what counts as credible? Who defines the indicators? Who controls reporting platforms? When women-led organizations generate evidence but cannot access policy forums, the issue is not methodological, it's a structural exclusion. Data governance is governance. If we are serious about inclusive biodiversity policies, we must address the power dynamics embedded within our data system. So with that, can we move on to the next slide, please? Encouragingly, 96% of our respondents expressed strong interest in peer-to-peer learning and collective capacity strengthening. This signals something important, that women-led organizations are not asking to be brought in. They're asking for equitable partnership, resourcing, and structural pathways to influence. So the readiness exists. What remains lacking is the institutional responsiveness. So what must we shift? First, the recognition must expand. Qualitative, narrative, and traditional knowledge system must be treated as legitimate forms of biodiversity evidence, not as side notes. Second, financing must shift. Direct, flexible, sustained funding must reach women-led and community-based organizations to support their data systems. Third is the integration must be operationalized. Clear, accessible mechanisms must be created for community-generated and women-led evidence to inform national and global biodiversity processes. Without these shifts, we risk reproducing inequality within the very systems designed to address ecological crisis. So with that, my final reflections are that the biodiversity loss is not gender neutral. Data systems are not neutral. Governance structures are also not neutral. So if we continue to privilege centralized technocratic data architectures without addressing whose knowledge is visible and whose is invisible, we will not achieve transformative biodiversity governance. Women-led organizations are already doing the work. They are documenting change, they are generating solutions, and they're building networks of learning and accountability. The question is not whether they are ready. The question is whether biodiversity governance systems are prepared to evolve. So today's launch is simply not about presenting the report. It's a call to reimagine this biodiversity data governance as inclusive, equitable, and accountable. So that's with that, I'm going to end. Thank you, and hope you are able to read the report in its entirety with Pami sharing it in the link. And do reach out to us if you have any more questions, clarifications after this.
Thank you so much, Shruti, for this super powerful overview of the report. I think you have given us a lot of food for thought, and not only for thought, but actually for action. So perhaps one way of knowing also if what Shruti has shared has resonate with you all participants to this event, please come to this Mentimeter and let us know if any of these findings, if you have seen them also in your own work, if you have seen something different. What do you think of this powerful information that we have received? We are going to give you a couple of minutes to engage with the Menti. It is in the chat as well. You have the link over there. And if we kindly, as we received informations, answers, if we can go and look into them. Is it about structures? Is it about processes? Is it about narratives? What is that from this report that resonates more with you? Let us know here in the Mentimeter. If it's possible to see the Mentimeter screen, that will be really helpful so we can see the results as they come in. Which of these findings resonate? We see that definitely there's a need for flexible and sustained funding. The management limitations is as well something that is present in your work. What else? Lack of funding, like the overestimation of extractive approaches, as one of the barriers. The need for policy spaces to open up and recognition of data ownership. Yeah, the governance structures are not inclusive or not fully inclusive. Also the need, and there's a lot of work, right, to be done also with the funding community. So whichever the research outputs are, they are open to accept them as they come, right? What else do we have here? Patriarchy system dominating biodiversity conservation and policy. Invisibility of who is impacting and bringing change. And the data that records it, the necessity to make visible, to contribute the transformation. Capacity and strengthening for women to fill the technology gap. That is also one of the main points that this report was focusing on, right? Like the access to technology, to digital tools, like are women engaging with them? What are the opportunities, the barriers there? So hopefully you can go through the report in detail. It is in Spanish, in French, in English, so hopefully that will also increase its chances to be used in your own processes. What else do we have here in the Menti? The importance of including community knowledge in biodiversity monitoring, the implied perpetuation of imbecility of women in policy matters and participation, access to information is one of the findings that have resonated. It's helpful to understand the gender landscape better in biodiversity conservation, especially for this person who works with digital technologies and the lack of access to tools for women. So we see that definitely this report is touching on realities that you all are going through, and that also contributes to proof, like it's a bit of peer review that the findings coming through the survey are as well being lived by you all. And that's why this initiative and the next steps hopefully make also sense to you all, and we can collectively continue to work on the next steps of this process. We will stop here with the Menti. Thank you so much for sharing your reflections with us. And now is a moment to go with the panel discussion. Here we are going to have 4 interventions. I will introduce my colleagues as we come into each of your interventions, but just a quick reminder that we have 5 minutes max for each of you. So I will come and cut you at some point if you are going beyond the time. Just we need to make sure about that. But I hope that time is good enough for all of us to get a bit of better understanding on the work that you do and how does this report it's also talking to your daily activities. First of all, let us welcome Ms. Kiri Booth. She is Program Officer at the Policy Innovation Area for the UNEP World Conservation Monitoring Center, and she will tell us a bit about how their findings of this report validate her observations, the implications she sees for her work and others. So it's our pleasure to have you with us, Kiri. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and hello, everyone. So similar to the work that's being led by the CBD Women's Caucus and IIED, a big priority in our work at UNEP WCMC is to work with governments and local partners to ensure that national biodiversity policies are designed and implemented and monitored in a way that supports gender equity and the fulfillment of human rights. So given the synergies in our work, I wanted to comment on how the findings in this report complement some of the observations that we've seen through our work at UNEP World Conservation Monitoring Center. So just recently, we, together with the Forest Peoples Programme, hosted an expert workshop to gather insights on how rights-based monitoring of the global biodiversity framework is being approached in different countries by governments and community organizations, to help build a picture of where progress is being made and where more work is needed to improve gender responsive and rights-based monitoring. So in the workshop, we heard directly from women-led, Indigenous and community organizations about the advanced systems that they're using for monitoring trends in biodiversity, traditional knowledge, and other aspects relating to their rights. And we also heard from government partners about their progress and plans for using rights-based approaches to monitor and report their progress for the global biodiversity framework. And the experiences and the challenges and the needs that we heard in that workshop align really well with the findings in this report. So to start with, we know that there are many good examples of women-led, Indigenous-led, and community-led organizations who are using advanced systems for monitoring trends in biodiversity at different spatial scales in different countries. And what became clear in the discussions is that these information and monitoring systems can be of high value to governments who often face challenges with missing and incomplete data for monitoring and reporting at the national level. However, the participants also highlighted that in many countries that data and knowledge is not currently recognized, or it's not used at the government level, which misses a really important opportunity for mobilizing data from all available sources in a way that aligns with a rights-based and a whole of society approach. Our work also confirms that whilst environmental and social data are being collected at the national level, it's often not disaggregated by gender, age, ethnicity, and other factors. And without disaggregated data, it's really difficult to see how different men and women are being impacted by environmental decisions, including what their specific needs, vulnerabilities, and contributions are. And those data gaps create evidence gaps. Governments rely on having evidence to make informed policy decisions. But if governments don't have disaggregated data as part of their evidence base, it's really difficult to ensure that those policies will have fair and equitable benefits for both men and women. And finally, there's some really good examples of governments collaborating with community organizations to co-produce data for the purpose of monitoring and reporting on the Global Biodiversity Framework. And the discussions revealed that those collaborations are most meaningful when governments recognize that Indigenous, local, and women-led data are valid and valuable sources of evidence. It works best when governments provide technical, financial, and capacity support to women-led and community organizations to participate in monitoring processes, and when governments apply fair and care principles to the sharing, use, and governance of data. So one of the most important messages I would like to convey is that gender-responsive and rights-based approaches to monitoring don't only concern what we monitor, but also how we monitor. It concerns whose knowledge is valued and what practical, institutional, and financial measures are put in place to facilitate the meaningful inclusion of women, Indigenous peoples, local communities, and youth, and their knowledge in monitoring processes. So if I were to reiterate some of the most important calls to action in this report, they would be for governments to recognize that community-generated data is valid and valuable evidence for informing policy decisions, and to embed institutional mechanisms for community-generated data to feed into planning and monitoring at the national level. And for institutions, my recommendation would be to move away from project and partnership models that are extractive and build partnerships that actively support the agency of women-led and community organizations to contribute their data and knowledge to influence evidence gathering and decision-making processes. So I shall leave it there and back to you.
Thank you so much, Kire, as well for these remarks. I won't aim to make any summary of them because you gave us so many concrete guidelines and points to think and act on. So I hope that everyone, as I am doing, taking like crazy notes of all your suggestions and ways forward. So I hope everyone is also doing that as well to include in your own work forward. With that, thank you so much, Kire, again, and we will move on now to our next speaker, Mr. Benge Nirongo. He is Intergovernmental Specialist for Environment in the United Agencies for Women. UN Women, sorry. Dear Benge, the floor is yours. The questions are the same and the minutes as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Amelia and colleagues that have spoken before. I think at the end of the day, we'll end up, speaking to similar issues because I think the sentiment is the same across the board on this really excellent report that has that's being launched today. So first, I just wanted to congratulate the team that worked on it for producing a report that is not only timely to UN Women's work, but also being methodologically grounded in the lived realities of 70 plus organizations across the world, creating evidence that is both wide ranging but also deeply situated in gender equality work. Reading this assessment, I was struck by how strongly it confirms the long held truth that women-led and community-based organizations are already generating vital biodiversity data. and that they're also doing that in ways that embed cultural integrity, trust, and contextual accuracy. These include qualitative and narrative-based methods, spanning interviews, focus group storytelling, which powerfully reflect everyday realities of women and girls at the front lines of biodiversity management and action. At the same time, the report does highlight an important structural tension that while organizations excel in data collection, analysis, use, but also communication, only 37% engage in data management, creating that systemic bottleneck that limits long-term usability, but also accessibility and political uptake of the evidence that they produce in more formal systems. This is a critical gap that we must investigate a little bit further. Particularly valuable contribution I find in the report is its illustration of holistic data ecosystems where gender, socioeconomic, ecological, legal and indigenous knowledge categories sort of overlap with each other, with 86% collecting gender and social inclusion data, and as you report, 57% have been collecting traditional and indigenous knowledge information. So such integrative data sets do mirror the interconnectedness of biodiversity, livelihoods, social norms, an approach that is consistent also with the KMGBF's call for inclusive monitoring. However, these findings make clear that the core barrier to influence is not the absence of evidence, and somebody already mentioned that earlier, but the absence of recognition and access. Community-generated data remains undervalued in national and global decision-making spaces, a credibility gap that institutions have a responsibility to actively address. This, for us, raises an evaluatory question. Who creates the enabling environment in which community-led data becomes integral rather than peripheral? We need clearer system-wide role definition. Community organizations do engage with local authorities more directly. National institutions are integrating community data into statistical systems where possible, and we have to work more on that. But also international bodies such as FAO or the CBD mechanisms can help elevate local evidence into national reporting streams. So that division of labor needs to be clarified. We need to make sure that the report points towards these multi-level conduits, but we must now articulate them a little bit more deliberately. The gender data value chain also deserves a bit more sharper attention. Issues of norms, participation, security, agency, and power dynamics, which actually make what we would call the gender value chain. They shape who participates in generating data and whose knowledge is validated. Strengthening gender-responsive data systems now means reckoning with these dynamics as part of the methodological architecture, not as background context alone. I co-authored a paper in this regard with UN Habitat's GLTN in 2021 on ensuring data value chains are designed and implemented in gender-responsive ways in the land sector. And I quickly realized that the principles are very similar once you move across sectors, which are similarly reflected in this study. So I really, really appreciate the connections there. I was also encouraged to see, and Kira also mentioned this, that 96% interest in peer-to-peer learning, signaling that community organizations are not passive recipients of support, but rather active agents ready for co-leadership, exchange, and collective capacity building. The challenge now is in designing platforms that reflect their time, resource constraints, and local knowledge systems, especially if we factor in women in light of their daily gender roles. It's impressive to see the thematic areas covered by the respondents cut across a cross-section of MEAs, which is crucial in advancing gender-responsive synergies across them. This is vital not only for efficiency reasons, but also for acknowledging that actions intended for one environmental challenge can have inadvertent effects on others, creating a holistic solution set for broader environmental action. So UN Women here is working in this area to advance synergies across data management around the Rio Conventions as per our working paper we produced in 2024, and I'll be happy to share that with you. And finally, I just want to underscore a subtle but yet significant insight. These local data systems exist because they solve real resource and capacity gaps, often more effectively than top-down mechanisms that are set up by national systems. So our task at policy, institutional, and donor levels is not to override the systems, but to sustain, amplify, and integrate them in ways that preserve community ownership and cultural integrity. And I'm also happy to share a lot of the work we're doing on our Women Count program in ensuring that we can generate, manage, and disseminate gender and environment data in this area. So thank you so much for having me, and looking forward to hearing more from other speakers.
Thank you so much as well to you, Benge, and also for bringing these key points as well. I'm not making a summary, just perhaps highlighting a couple of points you mentioned, that gender responsive data should not be just background, but should be core into the conversation. And the point that obviously like you bring really well into all the conversations is the synergies, right? When we speak about gender and biodiversity data, most of the things that we are addressing, it's like saying gender and environment, no, in impacts land, climate, water, development, and so on. So once this data could be considered forward, we are not only focusing on the biodiversity agenda, but is the interlinkages between social, economic, and environment agendas as well. Thank you so much for bringing these reflections. And I will pass now the floor and invite our colleague, Ms. Charlotte Clark, Advocacy and Research Officer at Carine Environmental and Social Action Network, KESAN, to come forward as well and share with us her perspectives on the findings of this report. Thank you so much for accepting the invitation and being here with us this morning. Welcome, Ms. Charlotte.
Thank you so much. Yes, I'm Charlotte. You can also call me Lottie. And thank you so much for inviting me and creating this very clear, accessible report. It's very important. And it really resonates a lot with our work at the community level. So I'm very proud to be representing my colleagues and the Indigenous women researchers who I am privileged to work alongside. Who are unfortunately unable to join this webinar, but I will do my best to represent their work. So yeah, I work with KESAN. Just very brief introduction, we're a community-led civil society organization, and we're working to protect and realize the rights of Indigenous Karen people in Korthule in southeastern Myanmar. So this is a context where there's been a long conflict, there's been oppression from successive military governments, and a long struggle for self-determination spanning more than 75 years. So it's a unique context, and our work at KESAN encompasses a range of community priorities, including food sovereignty, livelihoods, cultural revitalization, environmental governance, land tenure security, and communal land rights recognition. And I think that's quite common with a lot of Indigenous and women-led organizations. Their work encompasses a wide range of things that affect people's lives. We are engaged in community-led research within our Indigenous conserved territories. So that includes camera trap surveys, community-based forest patrols, wildlife conservation areas, and community forests. We've also done research on climate change adaptation and mitigation, forest cover analysis, and we have an Indigenous Women's Research Group, which I will talk about more today, which has consistently carried out research blending local knowledge with academic science, so-called academic science. And so this Women's Research Group, they've done research on ethnobotanical species, mushrooms, orchids, amphibians, and most recently on fish in the Upper Bueloko or Usalin River. And within that report, they've identified potentially endemic species And I think most fascinating for me is they've also detailed how spawning patterns of some fish called the nyana fish rely on human custodianship activities. So this is really important information. I think it will be shared in the chat so you can read the report yourself. And I think it just shows that, Karen Indigenous communities have a wealth of knowledge. They have generations of experiential and observational evidence relating to biodiversity, ecosystem health, and the threats that are present, as well as the climatic shifts. So I think recognizing that knowledge and acknowledging the specialized knowledge that women also bring to natural resource governance. So training the Karen Indigenous women on biodiversity research has been really transformative. When I say specialized knowledge, actually the women often have sometimes broader knowledge than some of the men in the communities we work with, because they're using a lot of non-timber forest products. They know more about herbal medicines. They're responsible for, a lot of the cooking and work that goes on domestically. So they have a real wealth of knowledge that I think previously was kind of not uplifted or not documented. And so not only have the outputs of this research been really impactful, but also the process itself, right? So when we know that when we empower women, we're bringing the whole community together. So when the women go out and do biodiversity surveys, they're also bringing in other community members, not just women. They're bridging a gap generationally. They're bringing in the youth. A lot of youth have become involved. So when we talk about women, we're also talking about bringing in the whole community. And so empowered women are better positioned to advocate for protecting their natural resources by identifying, for example, key conservation species and ecosystems, not only, from like a very scientific lens, but also from like a cultural significance, right? Which species are important to conserve, to protect, to monitor. And we see the direct impact of that. For example, the orchid research, we identified more than 140 orchid species, many of which were endemic, and more than 77% were classified as endangered under IUCN. In response, the women and the community members advocated to the de facto government in this area, which is called the Karen National Union. So they advocated to the local government, and that led to efforts to enforce local policies and to prohibit the trade of these endangered orchid species. So that's a very direct impact. Also, the result of that advocacy and awareness raising from the research has enhanced biodiversity in the area. We can see that directly. Populations of endangered and vulnerable species such as hooded gibbons have surged. So in areas where you could not hear them before, now you hear them frequently. You hear the song of the gibbon. And the insights from this research have led to targeted restoration, community-led restoration of wildlife corridors, for example. And a lot of these areas were degraded because of the conflict, because of the Burma Army attacks. So I could go on a whole other conversation about how this links also to peace building. But anyway, so yeah, in terms of the report, I think we experience a lot of similar challenges that were also raised in the report. Data organization, I think we can benefit from strengthening our data management and access to that data from the communities as well. And I'm almost done. And also, yes, limited human resources, which also links to the funding. So for us, we have funding, but we're missing that sustained funding, because it really takes a lot to train these research groups and to kind of continue the process. It takes a lot of work. It's a lot of their time. Data communication was also identified as a need in the report, which really does resonate with us. And we're also very interested in peer-to-peer learning. I think, to sum up, what's clear is that when women are centered, they bring the whole community with them and they bridge intergenerational knowledge. And I think right now in this kind of global context where the UN is uncertain, the funding landscape is very uncertain, I think I really want to highlight the value of this kind of research and how it's actually having an impact at the local level. And moving forward, I think building up the local capacities around data storage, sharing data, and storytelling about what this data shows with other groups in the global south, other subaltern groups, other indigenous groups, and how we can be in solidarity with each other and strengthen our collective voice, and strengthen our collective efforts to, land rights, rights to territory, healthy environment, and the rights of nature too.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to you, Lottie. You have also brought so many other angles to this conversation, no? The angle of conflict, but also peace, the angle of ecological knowledge, but the interconnected with traditional knowledge, no? Like how different aspects of gender diversity data should be and can be addressed, and the multiple benefits that can be delivered on if the actions are holistic. I will invite now, and it's also our pleasure to have with us Ms. Marina Lopez Sincal. She is a gender and biodiversity focal point of the government of Guatemala, and she will be presenting us as well from a governmental perspective how gender responsive biodiversity data is critical. Muchas gracias, Marina, por estar hoy con nosotras en esta mañana y te damos la palabra. Bienvenida.
Gracias. Hola, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo están? Mucho gusto. ¿Logran escucharme?
Sí, te escuchamos,
Sí,
claro.
perfecto. Muchas gracias. Qué alegría poder compartir con ustedes en relación a un tema muy importante, ¿verdad? Un cordial saludo desde Guatemala. Ahorita son a las 6:30 de la mañana, pero siempre es un placer poder compartir algunas experiencias que sin duda también aportan para que podamos conocer qué es lo que estamos haciendo desde distintos puntos del mundo, por decirlo así, en relación al tema de datos, que es muy importante. En ese sentido, pues quisiera resumir la forma como Guatemala también estamos abordando este tema, y en ese sentido creo que me parece importante reconocer que este informe que se está lanzando, que se está promoviendo, primeramente nos permite situar con precisión cuál es el vínculo con las proyecciones que ya están en marcha y las otras iniciativas que van surgiendo, ¿verdad? Conforme pasa el tiempo y nos damos cuenta que hay otros retos y desafíos. Sin embargo, esto también nos motiva, nos exhorta para que dupliquemos esfuerzos o nos unamos más para alcanzar los objetivos que se busca alcanzar. En ese sentido, creo que es pertinente que les comparta un poco qué es lo que hace o cuál es mi participación en este espacio. Pues soy parte del Consejo Nacional de Áreas Protegidas de CONAP Guatemala. El CONAP es el ente rector de la conservación y el uso sostenible de la diversidad biológica en las áreas protegidas de Guatemala, que también podemos, por ejemplo, mencionar que también tiene influencia en el mar territorial. De manera incipiente, podríamos decir, pero sí estamos introduciendo. Yo creo que yo lo logré escuchar que también el enfoque holístico en toda esta parte de la diversidad biológica y áreas protegidas es muy importante que vayamos introduciendo en todos los instrumentos de gestión que rigen nuestro trabajo. Háblese de planes, de estrategias, de políticas, de otras iniciativas, de normativos y todo lo que pueda tener un marco que nos oriente ese trabajo con enfoque holístico. Cuando hablamos de enfoque holístico, tenemos que situar a las personas y vincular sus derechos en cuanto a la participación en esa gestión para que podamos contribuir al desarrollo integral de la sociedad, que nos incluimos también nosotras como personas, ¿verdad? Y esto es lo que se busca con esto es que también la provisión de los bienes y servicios naturales a las presentes y futuras generaciones las podamos garantizar, que las tengamos nosotras, pero también que las futuras generaciones tengan y encuentren esas condiciones óptimas de la diversidad biológica. Así entonces, como punta de partida, quisiera también resaltar que la diversidad biológica con equidad de género en el CONAP también lo promovió a través de la creación en su estructura organizacional una unidad de género a la cual represento con mucho orgullo, ¿verdad? Como Guatemala. Y entonces, ¿qué es lo que estamos haciendo ahí desde esa unidad de género? Pues estamos impulsando primeramente un proceso de institucionalización. ¿Qué quiere decir eso? Que no solamente la unidad, o sea, con Marina de Guatemala, como me conocen, o Leti, sea la única responsable, no. Cuando estamos persiguiendo una institucionalización, es que también todas las otras unidades administrativas asuman esa responsabilidad, porque al final las acciones de género con pertinencia cultural debe ser un eje transversal, debe ser como un mandato de todos, porque al final el enfoque de género con pertinencia cultural nos invita, nos exhorta a tener una mirada horizontal general para que veamos que son personas las que están relacionándose con la diversidad biológica y que no son solamente un tipo de personas de una sola edad, sino que también en el contexto de Guatemala somos 24 comunidades lingüísticas. Entonces, desde ahí empieza como que esa lucha de poder institucionalizar. ¿Y qué vamos a garantizar con eso? ¿Qué buscamos? Es que por lo menos hagamos esa contribución al desarrollo integral de las mujeres, ¿verdad? De acuerdo a las competencias del CONAP. Entonces, en ese sentido, la unidad de género ha estado realizando diversas situaciones o trabajo de incidencia para que en esos instrumentos que vinculan el sistema guatemalteco de áreas protegidas, conocida como SIGAP, y todo lo que se hace en relación a la diversidad biológica en el país, se sumen esos esfuerzos y armonicemos un trabajo que implica la conservación y el uso sostenible. No podemos hablar de uso sostenible si no tomamos en cuenta a todas aquellas personas, sectores que se suman en ese sentido para poder realizar una gestión. ¿Cuál fue el primer instrumento que utilizó el CONAP o la unidad de género? Voy a compartirles que el primer instrumento fue la elaboración de una estrategia de equidad de género con pertinencia cultural, ¿verdad? Para que ese instrumento fuera como una medida afirmativa, una medida específica, ¿verdad? Para motivar el aumento de la participación de las mujeres en las actividades que se desarrollan en las áreas protegidas y sus zonas de influencia, por ejemplo, y otras de interés para la conservación, porque no solamente en las áreas declaradas legalmente como áreas protegidas, no solamente en ese territorio se resguarda la diversidad biológica, sino que alrededor de todo el país, por decirlo, también hay otras formas que deben ser reconocidos, y por eso es de que ese enfoque holístico y la adopción del CDB, el enfoque de derechos, eso es lo que como que nos dio la apertura, la puerta grande para poder decir, bueno, entonces generemos datos y veamos cómo esto va sumando a este esfuerzo global por resguardar la diversidad biológica. Y por otro lado, las conclusiones que nos ha presentado este informe, pues en primer lugar me sentí como que identificada, ¿verdad? Porque yo creo que a nivel del mundo, a nivel global, estamos haciendo esfuerzos, ¿verdad? Similares para que esto también nos ayude y nos motive y nos presente evidencias de que sí, tenemos que hacerlo. Todavía hay mucho por hacer para que esta evidencia de los datos puedan ser tomados en cuenta. Generamos datos, pero lo que necesitamos es que se tome en cuenta que esas decisiones para la formulación de las políticas públicas, las estrategias y la actualización, por ejemplo, en este caso, que la mayoría está actualizando su CDB o la Estrategia Nacional de Diversidad Biológica, que esos datos que se generan, que ya lo producen las comunidades, hombres, mujeres y de distintos contextos, puedan ser tomados en cuenta. No solamente numérico, como he estado resaltando, ya no es posible que solamente seamos parte de números, de estadísticas, sino que también hay conocimientos en las comunidades y que hombres y mujeres, y principalmente mujeres, son legítimas poseedoras de esos conocimientos. Por tanto, los hallazgos que se reflejan en este informe nos permiten realizar un análisis crítico y de reflexión profunda por la situación situaciones similares que las mujeres de todo el mundo. Estamos tratando de decir, alzando la voz con esos datos. Esto pues reconfirma más que todo, ¿verdad?, de que hay situaciones emergentes y necesitamos hacer un replanteamiento y fortalecer más el trabajo en redes nacionales e internacionales para enfrentar este desafío que todavía debemos trabajarlo duramente. Es así como en el caso de Guatemala, pues yo voy a hablar, ¿verdad?, de que todos los esfuerzos que realizamos aquí en la unidad y con el CONAP, también estamos apuntando a ese 51%, ¿verdad? Más del 51% de la población que según el último censo de Guatemala, pues somos mayoritariamente mujeres, ¿verdad? Y en su mayoría mujeres indígenas. Este dato es indispensable, ¿verdad? Para que podamos seguir garantizando y también impulsando acciones de empoderamiento, vayamos propiciando esa participación plena en todos los niveles de toma de decisiones. Ya no estamos como que conformándonos solamente que nos tomen en cuenta y y posteriormente digan, bueno, el 50% de mujeres fueron beneficiadas, pero ese beneficio alguien más tomó la decisión. Nos gustaría, ¿verdad?, de que este informe sea como una herramienta más para que podamos decir, no, que sí, podemos seguir siendo beneficiarias, pero también tenemos que ser gestoras de esa diversidad biológica en donde se reconozca jurídica, política y técnicamente esos esfuerzos globales que se están realizando. Así es como también, como una forma también de decir específicamente, estamos impulsando un plan de visibilización. ¿Qué quiere decir eso? Que ese plan de visibilización nos permita a nosotras, ¿verdad?, demostrar qué es el trabajo que están realizando las mujeres para proteger, para conservar todo lo que se posee en la madre tierra, porque esa es el planeta Tierra está como que nombrada en femenino, porque es lo que nos da todo lo que necesitamos desde el consumo, alimento, medicina, vestuario otros beneficios que nos provee. Y hemos estado también realizando el esfuerzo de vincular todo el trabajo al plan de acción de género, ¿verdad? Que desde mi nombramiento como punto focal nacional de Guatemala he estado vinculando todos los instrumentos nacionales, pero también ahorita como que escalando al nivel internacional a través de la Meta 23 y el plan de acción de género. Ahora, entonces, ¿qué implicaciones vemos para las
Querida
instituciones y las...
Marina, mil,
Hola,
mil, mil disculpas que te tengo que interrumpir, pero
ajá,
necesitamos que vayas cerrando porque ya estamos sobre la
ok,
hora del evento. Gracias.
claro que sí. Entonces, para finalizar mi intervención, las implicaciones para el futuro, esto nos permitirá contribuir a que la gobernanza sea más coherente, sostenible y en efecto el uso de datos confiables fortalecerá la transparencia y la rendición de cuentas. Pero en síntesis, qué quiero remarcar con esto? Que la política, nosotros estamos impulsando una política de participación social para que podamos también evidenciar que los datos tienen una soberanía y también tienen rostros diferentes y que desde esa soberanía y que de esos rostros diferentes podamos también impulsar acciones específicas con población diferente para que podamos contribuir de manera coherente al desarrollo y a la gestión efectiva de la diversidad biológica. Esa era mi contribución y en eso se basaba mi intervención de esta mañana. Y muchas gracias por hacerme partícipe en este espacio tan interesante.
Muchísimas gracias a ti, querida Marina. Disculpa que te haya tenido que interrumpir. Pero igual si tuvieras más ejemplos o ligas, páginas web que quieras compartir, porque en el chat las personas están preguntando sobre estos ejemplos que has mencionado. Eh, Voy a continuar en español y para darle simplemente la palabra a nuestra colega Karen Wong Pérez, que nos va a ayudarnos a cerrar el webinario explicando los siguientes pasos de esta colaboración. Muchas gracias, Karen, por todo.
Thank you, Amelia, and I will switch to English. Hello, everyone. As we have just heard from our speakers, from the very rich examples that they have generously shared and the assessment presented today, both of them provide an important picture of how women-led and community-based organizations are already generating and using gender-responsive biodiversity data. But the purpose of this initiative that we started, or that we are collaborating with the Women Caucus, was never only to produce a report. From the beginning, this work was designed as a first step in a longer process, a process that supports women's organizations to strengthen and to engage in peer-to-peer learning, exchange knowledge, and ensure that the evidence they generate can more effectively inform biodiversity policy and implementation. So I've seen in the chat some questions of what comes next after the report. So the next phase of this initiative is what we are calling a peer-to-peer learning journey process. This process is being developed collaboratively by the CBD Women's Caucus, IIED, and many members of the Caucus network. And importantly, it is being designed in direct response to the needs and interests expressed by the organizations who participated in the survey. Rather than a traditional training program, the formative process will bring together women's organizations, community-based organizations, practitioners, and partners from different regions to share methods, exchange experiences, and strengthen the way gender-responsive biodiversity data is generated and used. As you heard, across the world, many organizations are already developing innovative approaches to documenting the relationship between gender and biodiversity. And as Bengi noted earlier, the study shows that women's organizations are active agents ready to engage in collaborative learning. So the next phase speaks directly to this. It aims to create a space where women's organizations, community-based organizations, can share, strengthen, and build upon collectively. The formative process will begin in the coming months and will take place over a series of online sessions between April and June. It is aimed at women and gender organizations working at the local, national, and regional levels, particularly those representing or working with Indigenous peoples, Afro-descendant, and local communities. So all of you that have signed up to this Zoom call will receive more information about the formative process, what it entails, how to sign up, and you will have until the end of March to sign up to express interest. We will then start with an orientation session in mid-April, where we will introduce the objectives of the process and allow participants to get to know each other and create the foundation for a collaborative learning space. Following this orientation, the learning journey will consist of 3 thematic modules, each focusing on a different stage of the data value chain. We will start with Module 1 on data collection, where we will explore different ways of designing studies of gathering data that reflect the gender roles, knowledge, contributions, and experiences connected to biodiversity. Following Module 2, focused on data analysis and management in May, where we will emphasize, create a space for strengthening the ability of organizations to analyze and interpret data in gender-responsive and intersectional ways. So we will cover themes such as analyzing qualitative, quantitative information, understanding gender and social dimensions in data analysis. And it will have also a very strong emphasis on ethical data practices, including what Marina spoke about, data sovereignty, informed consent, data protection, and community ownership of information. Module 3 will focus on data use and communication in June. That will cover how data can be used effectively for advocacy, communication, and policy influence. We will have a closing session in June. Next slide, please. I'm just conscious of time. And for me, one of the most exciting outcomes of this formative process will be the collective creation of a gender data for biodiversity handbook. Throughout the modules, participants will be invited to share tools, case studies, methods, and lessons learned from their own work experience. And these contributions will be compiled and collected and synthesized into a practical handbook that will bring together and showcase existing methodologies for gender-responsive biodiversity data collection, approaches to ethical data governance and sovereignty, effective strategies for analyzing and communicating gender data, and real-world examples from women-led organizations across regions. And our aim is to launch this handbook ahead of COP17 as a resource that can support organizations, governments, and partners working to implement the global biodiversity framework in gender-responsive ways. In this sense, we see the handbook as a way to collectively build through the experiences and knowledge of the organizations participating in the formative process and to be co-authors of the handbook. So I will close this session by saying that we want this process to reflect the diversity of experiences, and we will like to warmly invite all of you organizations who are interested in participating to join us. As shared earlier, we will follow up next week to share more details of the formative process. And with that, I think that the last slide is the, no, next one. Sorry. Yes, it's the final slide where we celebrate that the report is now officially launched, and we will share in the chat and by email. And you will all receive the information about the formative process, so you can learn more and you can register if you are interested in joining us. The report is available in English, Spanish, and French, and we again warmly invite you to join the next stages and co-design this process together. Thank you to the CBD Women Caucus. It has been an honor and a pleasure to work on this and dream with you on this. And also thank you to the authors and the many organizations that provided their responses to the survey, to new partners in UN Women and UNWCMC, to interpreters, and to our discussants today, and each of you who have generously giving the time to join this webinar. Let us continue making space and reshaping the system together. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much to all of you. And this is the end of the session. Thank you so much to all of you.
Thank you. Have a good day.